Good day, everybody. I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 4 English lesson on similes and metaphors. And before we start our lesson, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. All right, so we see that we are doing our grade 4 English lesson on similes and metaphors. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, then we're going to select the subject of language arts. Grade 4. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of similes and metaphors. So similes and metaphors. Right? So our chapter is similes and metaphors. Our subject is English language arts, grade 4. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of similes and metaphors is to determine the meaning of similes and metaphors. All right. So when it comes to the meanings of similes or the meanings of metaphors, right? We see the simile, it's figures of speech that compares two things that are not actually alike. So we see that similes are figures of speech that compares two things that are actually the same. So we use words like something or something as something to compare something. It's like you're comparing either how fast or how slow someone is either to a cheetah or to a snail. So if you say that this one writes as slow as a snail, right? Now we know that like a snail is actually very slow, right? So that is how you're comparing her writing. If we say that this person writes very fast, right? Like a cheetah. Then we know generally like a cheetah runs very fast, right? So that is also how fast this one is either walking or writing or running, for example, right? And we look at similes and metaphors, right? Similes and metaphors, they compare things by saying that no one is like the other. By saying, sorry, one is like the other. All right. So if we also look at another example of either a simile or to, let's say, an example of a metaphor, it says, "My sister runs like a cheetah." So my sister runs like a cheetah. All right. So if we say my sister runs like a cheetah, right, like a cheetah, sorry, then we know that a cheetah, right, it generally runs very fast, which means that if we compare our sister's running to a cheetah, all right, so we see that my sister runs like a cheetah, and we see that it compares basically how fast the sister it runs, because remember we said a cheetah it generally runs very fast, right? It is known for running fast. All right. And here we have another example which says that the cat's fur was as dark as the night. So the cat's fur was as dark as the night. All right. So we see that another example is a cat's fur was as dark as the night. So we see that the cat's fur is being compared to how dark the night is. And if we compare the cat's fur to how dark the night is, then we know that at night it gets extremely, extremely dark, right? Right? So it means that if the cat's fur is as dark as the night sky, then it means that it is very, very dark at night. All right. So we say that simile, we say that a simile, it is a figure of speech that compares two things that aren't really alike. And now we have a metaphor, right? A metaphor, and a metaphor, it compares two things by saying that one of them is the other. All right. So we said a metaphor, it compares two things by saying that one of them is the other. So if we look at an example of a metaphor, right? And we said a metaphor, it compares two things by saying that one of them it is the other one, right? So when it comes to metaphors as well as similes, right? So it's saying that one thing is like the other thing. And if we look at an example, right, we can say the snow formed a blanket over the town. So we see that a metaphor, it compares two things by saying that one of them is the other. So we see that when it comes to metaphor, it's comparing two things, right? Another one is we say that the snow formed a blanket over the town. So usually when it is snowing, right, and when we say it forms a blanket over town, then we can say that the snow and the blankets are compared with the word like or as. So which means that a blanket, right, a blanket, it's a large piece of cloth that completely covers a bed. So that is how it is also with snow. If it's snowing a lot, then it's as if the snow creates some form of blanket, right? And if we look at the metaphor, so similes are comparing something, right? And then a metaphor, it makes the reader understand that the snow becomes a blanket covering the town completely. So if we'd say that it is a blanket, like they say, covering. All right, so we see that we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So now let's go to aplusstudents.ca and we are going to our title, which is Similes and Metaphors. And the first lesson that says determine the meaning of similes and metaphors. So we're going to determine the meaning of similes and we're going to determine the meaning of metaphors. All right. So we say that the simile and the metaphor, it's figures of speech that compares two things that are actually not alike, not alike. And a simile compares two things by saying that one thing is like the other. And she often uses words like. And if you look at an example, right, we say that my sister runs like a cheetah. All right, we're gonna start now. Just 1 minute. My sister runs like a cheetah, which means that we are not comparing her running fast like a cheetah that runs very fast, right? And then we have a metaphor, and it compares two things by saying that one of them is the other one. So if we look at metaphors, right, it is not the same, or let's say unlike similes, right? Metaphors don't use words like and as. So when it comes to metaphors, we don't use words like and we don't use the word as, right? All right. So now we're going to our test, right? Where we are going to determine the meaning of similes and the meaning of metaphors, right? We need to say what the meaning of the simile is. All right, so we said, what is the meaning of a simile, right? The workers were busy. It says the workers hurried around the office like working ants. Does it mean that the workers were busy? Or does it mean that the workers were tiny? Workers hurried around the office like worker ants. And if we look at what the simile is, it says the workers hurried around the office like workers ants. So if we say that the workers they hurried like around the office like worker minds, it means right that they were quite busy. Doesn't mean that they were tiny, it just means that they were quite busy cleaning and doing things around the office. Yes. Well done. So the first one is correct. So the first one is correct, right? All right. So we said that the first one is correct. Now we look at the second one. It says during Maria's trip, she felt like a queen. So during Maria's trip, she felt like a queen. All right. So it says during Maria's trip, she felt like a queen. Does mean that she was very angry or she was treated well. If somebody's treating you like a queen, does mean that they are treating you well or you are always angry. All right, it says, what is the meaning of a simile? During Maria's trip, she felt like a queen. Does it mean that Maria was angry or Maria was treated well? All right, then if we look at the great answer, we can say Maria was treated very well. Dustin's hair grows like a weed. All right. So it says Dustin's hair grows like weed. Does it mean Dustin's hair grows rapidly or his hair grows lighter in the sun? Does it grow rapidly or it doesn't grow much in the sun? All right, then if we choose the simile, right, we can say, is it Dustin's hair grows rapidly or Dustin's hair grows light in the sun? We can go with rapidly. All right, so what is the meaning of a smile? So the meaning of a smile. Oh, sorry. All right, we need to. It says Cody and Wendy smile for the camera like movie stars. So Cody and Wendy smiled for the camera like movie stars. Does it mean that Cody and Wendy has big beautiful smiles? All right, so Cody and Wendy they smiled for the camera like movie stars. Does it mean Cody and Wendy had big beautiful smiles, or number two, Cody and Wendy had picked a whole or picked a movie to watch, a whole movie to watch? All right. So here we can say that Cody and Wendy had big, beautiful smiles. If they're smiling for the camera, then it means that they have big, beautiful smiles. So the first one is correct. So well done. The first one is correct. All right. It says the spider waited by its web like a lonely fisherman waiting for a catch. The spider waited by its web like a lonely fisherman waiting for a catch. What is a catch? So, what is a catch? Do we say that the spider waited patiently Or do we say the spider waited for a fish? But now it says that the fisherman waited for a catch. What is his catch? All right. So once again, we say the spider waited by its web, like a lonely fisherman waiting for a catch. Do we say that the spider waited patiently? Or do we say the spider waited for a fish? So patiently, or do we say he waited for a fish? All right, and if we choose the correct one, we will choose the first one, right? Because it says that the spider had to wait, and then we can say that he is waiting patiently. All right, and patiently is correct. Now we're going to identify similes and metaphors, right? All right, so we said similes and metaphors, right, are figures of speech that compares two things that are actually not alike. And we said a simile, it compares two things by saying that one is like the other, right? And we often use words like and we use as. And if we look at what a metaphor is, it says a metaphor. It compares two things by saying that one of them is the other, right? So it's a comparing two things, and then we're saying that the one is basically like the other. Metaphors makes a blanket, right? The metaphor makes, right, the reader imagine that something is happening. All right. So here we have identified the similes as well as the metaphors, right? And we say that the metaphor, it compares two things by saying that one of them is the other. All right. And if we now going to identify both similes as well as, let's say, metaphors, right? Then it says the new blanket was as soft as a kitten's fur. Remember, we said that with similes we use words like as and like, whereas with metaphors we don't, right? So which means that this sentence, the sentence, is it a simile or is it a metaphor? The new blanket was as soft as a kitten's fur. All right. And now that's so that first sentence, right? We said is a simile, and also it's a simile because we use words like as, and we like words. We use words as or like in there, right? So currently we're using the word as, and we are comparing the new blanket to how soft the kitten's fur is. All right. So now we need to say is a sentence either a simile or we need to say if it is a metaphor, right? It says Brad swam with ease across the swimming pool. Remember, we said that with metaphors, right? Most of the metaphors don't have words like or as in most of it, right? So that says that we use, like when it comes to a metaphor, right? We don't use the words like or we don't use the words as, right? So that is when it comes to a metaphor. We don't use the words as, we don't use the words like in there. Whereas similes, they use words like and they use the words as in, right? Now we're going to our lesson, where it says, does the sentence use a simile or do we use a metaphor? So do we use a simile or do we use a metaphor? It says, Mrs. Sawyer is an owl, working at night and sleeping during the day. Is that a simile or a metaphor? All right, so Mrs. Sawyer is an owl working at night and sleeping during the day. The day, is that a simile or is that a metaphor? All right, so we see that Mrs. Sawyer is an owl And this owl is working at night and sleeping during the day. And if we were to compare if it's a simile or metaphor, right? All right. So if we were to choose either a simile or metaphor, right, of Mrs. Sawyer is an owl working at night during the day, right? And sleeping during the day, then we can say it is a metaphor. And a metaphor is correct. So well done, everybody. The second option, metaphor, is correct. So which means that if we look at the first one, right, and then we can say metaphor is that answer. Now we're going on to the next one that says, does the sentence use a similar or does it use a metaphor? The sunburn was a fire that spread across my back. All right, so we can say that the sunburn was a fire that spread across my back. So the sunburn was a fire that spread around my back. All right, so we see that the sunburn was fire that spread across my back, and we can say that is the second option. All right, yes, well done, well done. Metaphor is correct. And remember, with a metaphor, we don't use words like and we don't use the word as. Whereas with a simile, we use words like to compare something or as to compare another thing, right? The football soared through the air like a rocket. So this football soared through the air like a rocket. Is that a simile or is that a metaphor? Option one or option two? All right. So if we use the correct one, it says that the football soared through the air like a rocket, right? And we will say, especially with like a rocket, we can say this is simile, right? Option one, simile, correct. So well done. Which sentence uses a metaphor? We need to say which sentence uses a metaphor. All right. And if we were to identify, by saying which sentence uses a metaphor, it says the ripe tomatoes were small red balloons. Or the second one that says the ripe tomatoes were like small red balloons. So we need to select the metaphor or the one that uses a metaphor. Is it the first option, which says the ripe tomatoes were small red balloons? So if we were to say which one is a metaphor, we will say it's the first one. The ripe tomatoes were small red balloons. So number one, yes, it is correct. So well done, everybody. Number one is correct. All right. So now we need to say which sentence uses a metaphor. We need to say which one is a metaphor. Now we're going to say which sentence uses a metaphor. Oh, yes. So now we need to say which one is a metaphor or which one uses a metaphor. Does it say the wave was a towering wall rising from the sea, or the wave rose from the sea like a towering wall? All right. So we can say that which sentence uses a metaphor? It says the wave was a towering wall rising from the sea. So the wave was a towering wall rising from the sea. All right. So we see that the sentence that uses a metaphor, it is yes, the first option. Right? It is the first option, which says that it is a towering wall that rises from the sea. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on similes and metaphors. Thank you very much, grade 4, for joining the class, and I really hope you're going to have a good evening further. Goodbye. All right.